The audition. The marble floor of Carnegie Hall's lobby reflected Carol Peterson's worn shoes like a mirror of broken dreams. At 38, she clutched her sheet music against her chest, the pages soft from years of practice in a cramped apartment above a laundromat. Around her, pristine musicians in designer clothes whispered about conservatory training and European tours. "Number 47, the receptionist called, her voice cutting through Carol's racing thoughts. Behind the heavy oak doors, Maestro Vincent Ashworth sat in judgment. His reputation preceded him like thunder before lightning. 3 years ago, his wife had died in a car accident on her way to his premiere performance. Since then, he'd become ruthless, dismissing hopeful musicians with surgical precision, as if their failures could somehow balance his own devastating loss. Carol pushed open the door to find him hunched over a grand piano, his dark hair streaked with premature silver. His fingers moved across the keys with mechanical perfection, playing a piece she recognized but had never dared attempt. When he looked up, his gray eyes were empty as winter sky. "Name and experience," he said without preamble. "Carol Peterson. I taught piano for 15 years before the music program was cut." "Taught?" His voice carried the weight of dismissal. "And now you think you can perform?" The question hit like a slap. Carol's fingers trembled as she set her music on the piano. "I've been playing since I was 5. My grandmother said music chose me, not the other way around." Vincent's laugh was bitter as burnt coffee. "Music doesn't choose anyone, Miss Peterson. It's earned through blood and sacrifice, something I doubt you'd understand." Their eyes met across the piano bench, and for a moment, Carol saw something flicker beneath his cruelty. Pain, raw and unhealed, that matched the ache in her own chest from dreams deferred and chances lost. "Play," he commanded, settling back in his chair like a king awaiting entertainment. Carol's hands found the keys, and the opening notes of Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major filled the sterile air. But as she played, something shifted. The technical precision gave way to something deeper, more primal. She wasn't playing for the maestro anymore. She was playing for her grandmother's ghost, for every student who'd believed in magic, for the girl she used to be who thought anything was possible. When the last note faded, Vincent sat frozen, his face pale as sheet music. In her playing, he'd heard something he thought died with his wife, something that made his carefully constructed walls tremble. "Where did you learn to play like that?" His voice was barely a whisper. Before Carol could answer, the door burst open. A woman in an expensive suit strode in, her eyes flashing with barely contained fury. "Vincent, we need to talk. Now." Secrets unveiled. The woman's stiletto heels clicked against the marble like a countdown to disaster. Vincent rose from his chair, his jaw tightening as recognition flooded his features. "Elena," he said, the name carrying years of complicated history. "I thought we agreed you'd stay away from my auditions." Elena Reyes, the city's most ruthless talent agent, smiled like a predator who'd cornered her prey. "That was before I discovered your little secret, Vincent." "Did you really think no one would find out about the pills? The whiskey? The fact that you can barely play anymore without shaking?" Carol watched from the piano bench, trapped in the crossfire of their toxic dance. Vincent's hands, which moments before had moved with such precision, now trembled visibly. "Get out!" Vincent growled, but his voice lacked conviction. "Not until we discuss our arrangement." Elena's gaze shifted to Carol, assessing her like a piece of merchandise. "Though I have to admit your taste in charity cases has improved. She has potential." "She's not a charity case," Vincent snapped, surprising himself with the defensiveness in his voice. Carol stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "I should go. This obviously isn't about music anymore." "Wait!" Vincent's voice cracked like breaking glass. "You passed the audition." Elena laughed, a sound sharp as breaking crystal. "How generous of you, Vincent. Especially considering you haven't selected anyone for the winter concert in 2 years. Not since you started drowning your sorrows and destroying your reputation." The words hung in the air like poison. Carol saw Vincent flinch as if Elena had struck him physically. In that moment, she understood. The great Maestro Ashworth was as broken as she was, just better at hiding the cracks. "What do you want, Elena?" Vincent's voice was barely audible. "The same thing I've always wanted. You performing again. Your name sells tickets, even if your talent has diminished. Her smile was cruel. Lucky for you, I found investors willing to overlook your recent shortcomings. All you have to do is sign the contract. Elena slid a folder across the piano. Vincent stared at it like it contained his death warrant. There's one condition, Elena continued, her eyes glittering. Your little protege here gets to perform too. A heartwarming story about second chances. The press will eat it up. Carol felt the walls closing in. I never asked to be anyone's charity case or publicity stunt. No, Elena agreed. But you want this chance, don't you? I can see it in your eyes. The hunger. The desperation. Vincent looked at Carol, and she saw her own fractured dreams reflected in his gray eyes. They were both drowning, and Elena was offering them a rope with razor wire wrapped around it. If I sign, Vincent said slowly, Carol gets full billing, equal treatment, no exploitation. Elena's laugh was like glass breaking. You're hardly in a position to negotiate, darling. Not when I know about the accident. The color drained from Vincent's face. Carol saw his hands begin to shake violently and suddenly understood that whatever had happened to his wife wasn't the whole story. What accident? Carol whispered. The weight of truth. Vincent's hands stopped shaking, but only because he clenched them into fists so tight his knuckles turned white. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire ready to snap. Tell her, Vincent, Elena purred, circling them like a shark scenting blood. Tell her why you really can't perform anymore. Why your wife was driving to your concert that night instead of being there in the front row where she belonged. Stop! Vincent's voice was raw, broken, but Elena pressed on, her words surgical in their precision. She was leaving you, wasn't she? Had finally discovered your affair with that pretty little violinist from the orchestra? Sarah was driving to the concert hall to confront you publicly, to destroy your career the way you destroyed her heart. Carol felt the truth hit her like a physical blow. Vincent's anguish wasn't just grief. It was guilt, heavy and crushing, the weight of knowing his betrayal had put his wife on that dark, rain-slicked road. She died hating me, Vincent whispered, the words barely audible. The last thing she ever said to me was that she wished she'd never met me. Elena's smile was triumphant. And now you understand why you'll sign this contract. Because I own this story, Vincent. One phone call to the press, and your carefully cultivated image of the grieving widower crumbles. You become the cheating husband who killed his wife with betrayal. Carol watched Vincent crumble before her eyes, this man who had seemed so powerful, so untouchable. In that moment, she made a choice that would change everything. No, she said, stepping between them. Elena raised an eyebrow. Excuse me? I said no. You want your story? Fine, but Vincent and I are partners now. Equal partners. Or you get nothing. Vincent stared at her in shock. Carol, you don't understand what you're doing. She'll destroy you too. Maybe, Carol said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. But I've been destroyed before. I survived teaching piano to pay bills when I should have been performing on stages like this. I survived watching my dreams die one day at a time. I can survive her too. Elena's eyes narrowed dangerously. You think you're brave? Wait until the press discovers you're just a failed teacher playing dress-up with the professionals. Wait until they dig into your past and find out why you really stopped performing. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Carol felt her own secret stir. The reason she'd hidden behind teaching, behind safety, behind the fear of being truly seen. What's she talking about? Vincent asked quietly. Carol's throat tightened. She'd never told anyone about the accident when she was 19. The performance that had gone so wrong it ended not just her confidence, but someone else's life. A stage collapse during her debut recital. 7 people injured. One young girl who never walked again. It doesn't matter. Carol lied, but her voice betrayed her. Elena's smile was razor sharp. Oh, but it does. Because now I have both your secrets, and I'm going to use them to make us all very, very rich. Vincent reached for Carol's hand, and she felt the tremor in his fingers. 2 broken people holding each other upright in the wreckage of their past mistakes. Together? He asked. Together, she whispered. Elena clapped her hands slowly, mockingly. How touching. Now sign the contracts before I change my mind about being generous. But as Vincent reached for the pen, Carol saw something in Elena's eyes, something hungry and desperate that went beyond simple greed. This wasn't just about money or power. This was personal. The betrayal. 3 weeks later, Carol stood in Vincent's apartment, surrounded by empty bottles and scattered sheet music. The winter concert was tomorrow night, and he was falling apart. His hands shook so badly he couldn't play a simple scale. "We can cancel," Carol said, watching him struggle with a passage they'd rehearsed 100 times. "No." Vincent's voice was hoarse from another sleepless night. "Elena made it clear what happens if I back out. The story goes public. My wife's memory gets dragged through the mud." Carol knelt beside his chair, taking his trembling hands in hers. Over the past weeks, something had grown between them. Not love exactly, but understanding. Two damaged souls recognizing the fractures in each other. "Tell me about her," Carol said softly. "Your wife. Not the accident?" "Before." Vincent's gray eyes softened. Sarah laughed like music. "Real music, not the pretentious garbage they play at those society events. She used to leave little notes in my sheet music. Terrible puns about composers. She sounds wonderful." She was, until I threw it all away for a meaningless affair that lasted 3 months. His voice cracked. 3 months that cost us 20 years. Carol squeezed his hands. "You can't undo it, Vincent. But you can honor her memory by playing tomorrow night. Really playing. Not hiding behind technical perfection, but playing with the heart she fell in love with." For a moment, Vincent looked at her with something approaching hope. Then his phone rang. "It's Elena," he said, his face hardening as he answered. Carol watched his expression change from resignation to confusion to horror. "What do you mean, change of plans?" Vincent's voice was sharp. "No, absolutely not. That wasn't our agreement." He hung up, his hands shaking worse than before. "What happened?" Carol asked. "Elena just informed me that you're not performing tomorrow night. She's replaced you with someone else. Someone with a better story," she said. The words hit Carol like a physical blow. After weeks of preparation, of believing she finally had her chance, Elena had cut her out with surgical precision. "But the contract—" "Apparently there was a clause I missed. She has final approval on all performers." Vincent's voice was hollow. "I'm so sorry, Carol. I thought I could protect you." Carol stood slowly, the betrayal burning through her chest like acid. "You knew, didn't you? When you signed the contract, you knew there was a possibility she'd do this." Vincent's silence was answer enough. "You used me," Carol whispered. "Just like everyone else. I was never your partner. I was your shield. Someone to hide behind so Elena would focus her cruelty elsewhere." "That's not true, isn't it?" Carol's voice was rising, all the pain and disappointment of a lifetime channeling through her words. "You let me believe we were in this together while you made a deal that could throw me away the moment it was convenient." Vincent stood, reaching for her, but she stepped back. "Don't, just don't. Carol, please. Let me explain." "Explain what?" "That you're exactly what I thought you were when I walked into that audition room. A selfish, broken man who destroys everything he touches." The words hung between them like a blade. Vincent flinched as if she'd struck him physically. "You're right," he said quietly. "I am exactly what you thought I was. I'm sorry." Carol walked toward the door, then stopped with her hand on the handle. "Tomorrow night, when you're on that stage playing for an audience that doesn't know what a fraud you are, remember this moment. Remember that you had a chance to be better than your worst impulses, and you chose to be exactly who you've always been." She left without looking back, not seeing Vincent collapse into his chair, not hearing him whisper her name into the empty apartment. But she didn't see Elena step out of the shadows in the hallway, her smile sharp as a knife, having heard every word of their conversation. Phase 2 of her plan was complete. Redemption. The concert hall blazed with golden light as New York's elite settled into their seats. Vincent stood in the wings, his hands steady for the first time in weeks, not because the shaking had stopped, but because he'd made peace with it. Elena appeared beside him, radiant in victory. "Ready for your comeback performance, darling?" "Where's Carol?" Vincent asked, though he already knew the answer would cut deep. "Home, I imagine, watching on the live stream with the rest of the little people." Elena's smile was cruel. "Don't look so tragic, Vincent. You got what you wanted. Your reputation intact, your career saved. At what cost? The same cost you've always paid. Other people's dreams. Vincent looked out at the audience, searching faces until he found one in the upper balcony. Carol sat alone in the cheap seats, having bought a ticket with money she couldn't afford to lose. Even after his betrayal, she'd come to watch him play. You know, Elena continued conversationally, I never told you why I really wanted this concert to happen. Something in her tone made Vincent turn. What do you mean? Sarah was my sister. The words hit Vincent like a freight train. Elena's smile was sharp as winter wind, all pretense of friendliness gone. Half-sister, technically. Same father, different mothers. She never acknowledged me, of course. I was the daughter from his first marriage, the inconvenient reminder of his past. Elena's voice was poison sweet. But I loved her anyway, and you killed her! Vincent staggered backward. Elena, Tonight isn't about your comeback, Vincent. It's about justice. In approximately 10 minutes, every news outlet in the city will receive a very detailed account of your affair, your wife's final night, and the real reason she died. Your career won't just end. It will be buried so deep it never sees light again. The curtain call announcement echoed through the backstage area. Vincent had 90 seconds to make a choice that would define the rest of his life. He thought about Carol, sitting alone in those upper seats. About the trust he'd shattered and the dreams he'd crushed. About Sarah and the man he'd been when she'd loved him. Vincent walked onto the stage, the spotlight blinding after the darkness of the wings. The audience applauded politely, unaware they were watching a man's final performance. He sat at the piano, placed his shaking hands on the keys, and began to play. Not the technically perfect piece he'd rehearsed, but something raw and broken and honest. Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, the same piece Carol had played in her audition. As the music filled the hall, Vincent felt something shift inside him. The notes weren't just sounds anymore. They were confessions, apologies, and promises he'd never be able to keep. They were love letters to a dead wife and to a woman who'd shown him what courage looked like. When he finished, the audience sat in stunned silence. Then, slowly, someone began to clap. Carol, standing in the upper balcony, her applause echoing through the hall. Others joined her until the entire audience was on their feet. Vincent stood, walked to the microphone, and spoke into the hushed space. 3 years ago, I lost my wife in a car accident. What you don't know is that she was driving to confront me about my affair. She died because of my selfishness, my weakness, my betrayal of the woman who loved me most. Gasps rippled through the audience. In the wings, Elena's face went white with rage. Tonight was supposed to be my comeback, Vincent continued, his voice steady despite the tears streaming down his face. But instead, it's my goodbye. Because I don't deserve to stand on stages like this. I don't deserve your applause or your forgiveness. He looked up at Carol, their eyes meeting across the impossible distance. But someone else does. Someone who has real courage, real talent, and a heart I spent weeks trying to break because I was too much of a coward to face my own demons. Vincent stepped away from the microphone and began walking toward the exit. The audience watched in stunned silence as he paused at the edge of the stage. Her name is Carol Peterson, he called out. And she's sitting in seat 47 of the upper balcony. She's the musician I wish I could have been. Then he walked off stage and out of the building, leaving behind his career, his reputation, and the weight of 20 years of guilt. Carol sat frozen in her seat as the audience turned to look at her. She thought about running, about hiding, about all the ways she'd protected herself from moments exactly like this. Instead, she stood. 6 months later, Carol performed her debut solo concert in the same hall. Vincent wasn't there to see it, having left the city to teach music to children in a small town upstate. But Elena was, sitting in the front row, finally understanding that some victories are hollow and some defeats are the beginning of redemption. As Carol's fingers found the opening notes of her grandmother's favorite melody, she thought about broken people finding their way back to wholeness, about courage that comes not from fearlessness, but from choosing love despite the cost. The music filled the hall like prayer, like forgiveness, like hope. The end.